There's something quietly happening to people who believe they're doing everything right. It doesn't arrive as a crisis. It doesn't feel like failure. Most days, it feels like progress. You wake up, you consume information, you stay informed, you keep learning. Years pass, careers move forward, life stays busy, and yet, somewhere underneath all of that motion, something erodes. Not intelligence, not motivation, something more personal. The way you think begins to narrow without you noticing. The way you understand becomes shallower, even as you know more. And slowly, almost politely, parts of your potential disappear. No alarm goes off when it happens. No one tells you you're losing something. By the time most people sense it, they don't recognize it as loss. They just feel tired, uncertain, disconnected from the sharp version of themselves they assumed would arrive eventually. I didn't notice it either until I realized how many years I had already paid. You don't need to believe me yet. But if you're still listening, there's something you should know. What I'm about to talk about isn't a single idea. It isn't a trick or a realization you can grab in the first few minutes and walk away with. It unfolds in layers. Each layer changes how the next one feels. And the final one, there's no clean way through it. Most people leave before they reach it. Not because they're lazy, but because the early parts feel familiar enough to give a false sense of understanding. That's the trap. If you step out early, you won't just miss the point. You'll walk away convinced you already got it, while carrying the same misunderstanding that caused the problem in the first place. I've seen that happen. I did that myself. I didn't come to this understanding through clarity. I came to it through confusion. There was a stretch of time when I felt constantly behind. Even though nothing was obviously wrong, I was reading the right books, listening to people who sounded smart, taking notes like I was supposed to. From the outside, it looked like momentum. On the inside, it felt like trying to hold water in my hands. I remember sitting alone late at night, staring at pages I had already read twice, realizing I couldn't explain what they meant without repeating someone else's words. That bothered me more than I admitted. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I couldn't tell whether the ideas had actually changed me at all. I didn't feel stupid. I felt disoriented, as if I had followed the map exactly, only to end up somewhere unfamiliar. There was no moment of failure I could point to, just a quiet sense that something wasn't lining up and that if I ignored it, I would eventually stop noticing it altogether. The belief I trusted most was also the one that misled me the longest. I believed that staying informed was the same as becoming sharper. That if I kept reading, listening, highlighting, and collecting ideas, understanding would naturally deepen. It sounded responsible. It was praised. No one warned me that it could backfire. Over time, I realized it had done something subtle. The more I consumed, the less I questioned. The more notes I took, the less I struggled. And without realizing it, I had trained myself to recognize ideas instead of confront them. That habit didn't make me careless. It made me compliant. I mistook familiarity for insight. I confused remembering someone else's conclusion with reaching my own. This wasn't a personal failure. It was built into the system. Everything around me rewarded speed, coverage, and accumulation. Understanding real understanding was never measured, never demanded. I had believed this was how thinking improved. It took me years to see that it was quietly doing the opposite. When that realization finally surfaced, it didn't arrive as panic. It came as relief. Not because the problem was small, but because it wasn't personal. Nothing was wrong with my discipline, my intelligence, or my effort. I hadn't failed at learning. I had simply been moving through a system that blurred activity with understanding. That matters, because blame has a way of shutting people down. And this wasn't about fault. It was about orientation. What I felt wasn't embarrassment. It was recognition. A quiet moment of seeing myself clearly for the first time in a long while. The confusion I'd carried wasn't a flaw, it was a signal I'd been taught to ignore. Once I stopped fighting that feeling, the pressure eased. The need to keep up faded. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove that I was thinking. I was finally ready to notice how I actually was. What finally changed everything was a single realization, and it wasn't comfortable. I had been treating my mind like a storage unit. Fill it carefully, label everything, stack ideas neatly, and assume that, one day, I'd know how to use them. That approach felt productive, but it was fundamentally wrong. Understanding doesn't come from keeping ideas intact. It comes from breaking them apart. Real thinking is destructive before it's constructive. It asks you to take an idea you admire, strip it down to what actually holds it together, and see if it survives contact with your own experience. Most ideas don't, and that's the point. I began to notice that the moments when something truly changed for me weren't moments of learning. They were moments of reconstruction, times when an explanation collapsed, when a concept stopped making sense, and I had to rebuild it in my own language or abandon it entirely. It's like tearing down a house you inherited without ever checking the foundation. You don't preserve every wall. You keep what supports weight and discard what only looked solid from the outside. Once I saw thinking this way, everything else made sense. Why so much information left me unchanged. Why clarity only arrived after discomfort. Why real insight felt slower, quieter, but unmistakably mine. My mind didn't need more input. It needed space to rebuild. Once I understood that, the future stopped feeling like something I had to chase. Nothing external needed to change. My habits didn't suddenly matter more. My schedule didn't need to be rebuilt. What shifted was simpler and deeper than that. I became aware of when I was collecting ideas instead of engaging with them, when something felt easy too quickly, when understanding arrived without resistance. Those moments stopped feeling like progress. They became signals. That awareness creates choice. Not the kind that demands action, but the kind that restores agency. You begin to notice when your thinking is being shaped for you, and when it's being formed by you. There's a quiet confidence in that. Not certainty, not mastery, just a steady sense that your mind is no longer drifting on autopilot. And once you see that difference, you don't need instructions. You don't need pressure. You simply stop confusing motion with direction and let your thinking become your own again.